most founders don't think big enough. It takes training because you need others to encourage you, and you need to have gained a lot of something that Michael Gibson calls hyperfluency. So that's definitely one thing to make look closely for.
Welcome, everyone, to the Liberty Ventures podcast. My name is Alexander McCoven. I'm founder and CEO of Liberty Ventures. And as a reminder, if you're listening for the first time, the purpose of Liberty Ventures is to build the ecosystem of values-aligned business leaders, investors, executives, and entrepreneurs who are all committed to advancing a free and prosperous future and helping them scale their businesses in order to scale their impact. Now, this podcast is an opportunity to invite members of the ecosystem to share their experiences, their insights, and hopefully help you in your journey as an investor, an executive, or an entrepreneur, and hopefully even connect with them afterwards by highlighting the amazing things that they're doing. And today, I'm just absolutely thrilled to be speaking with Niklas Anzinger, who was an early member of the Liberty Ventures ecosystem. We have been in the same circles for a long time, but it was really only once Liberty Ventures got going and I got connected with all the great work you're doing in the investment space, Niklas, that we really started to talk. And so I am just so thrilled to have you on today and just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Alexander. Really great to be here and really excited to be involved in your community.
Let's start with your story. I would love for you to share your background, not just professionally and what you're doing right now, but just what's led to who you are and I'm sure what you're doing today that we're going to get into.
Sure. I'm originally from Germany, and I think like many others, I was searching for my calling and dabbling in different things. And I think what I've been looking for, I think was very well encapsulated by Steve Jobs, saying that, if you do without thinking, you lack direction, but if you think without doing, you lack kind of the precision, and you just a lot you don't get if you just stay in the world of ideas. So the first half of my career until I was like 26, I spent almost all my time in the world of ideas. I was exposed to a lot of economics. I was at the American Enterprise Institute, studied philosophy and public policy, and worked for Washington, D.C., other Washington, D.C. think tanks as well, went into management consulting, research. And I really enjoyed that. I really liked to be in the world of ideas, but I also felt there was something lacking. And something clicked for me once I entered the world of technology and entrepreneurship at the age of 26, right? So I joined a startup that I was really passionate about, that I felt was doing something that was changing the world. And I had a really great run. I really enjoyed learning the ropes of entrepreneurship. I was like the right-hand man to my boss. I started a new product that later became its own company and raised a Series B. So just learning to build a startup from the ground up, that just tremendously inspired me. And I think these are also the right tools to use to catalyze larger changes in the world. So after that first journey, I was looking, how can I apply that to bigger things, right? What's the biggest, most impossible, most ambitious mission I could go on? And it took me a while to find it. I was looking into different industries like healthcare during COVID, for example, and was just to my frustration, and having been studied and knowing public choice incentives, the reason why we're failing to innovate in healthcare is the FDA, to be frank, right? And the reason we don't get better crypto adoption is the SEC, right? And you can go down the list of several other areas, such as housing and such as other areas of finance, and is all these like government failures and sort of bad market designs due to like legal and regulatory constraints that prevent us from doing a lot better solutions. So I was like, how can you change that as an entrepreneur? I didn't really see a way. I got drawn to the idea of something like seasteading. And to me, it was a utopian dream until I read on Scott Alexander's blog about Prospera, the Caribbean, the startup city on the Caribbean island of Roatan. And I was like, this sounds too good to be true. I got to check this out. And coming there even exceeded my wildest expectations. When then I found a really tremendously great community of other entrepreneurs, many of them local, many Hondurans, that see it as an opportunity to upgrade and better their lives. And I've since made it like my mission to catalyze and continue that change that Prosper has started by successfully creating a startup society that's innovating when it comes to the legal system, which I think is tremendously important to advance the kind of ideas we care about, but also to solve poverty and also to really disrupt, to really catalyze a human progress and technological change at a magnitude that I think we can't fathom yet before we really see that in action. So with my fund now, I'm basically investing in and bringing and creating awareness in industries that are very regulated. So that's like biotech and healthcare, also hardware, air mobility, for example, and energy, and also crypto and legal tech, right? So these are all areas. So I like to joke it's like the FDA, the SEC, and the FAA that are kind of the uh, what are the alternatives to that? How can we catalyze startups that are confronted by these major obstacles? So that's what I'm doing now with Infinita Fund. And this has been a very successful first fund. It's not 100% yes to it. I'm still raising a little bit. It's at about 3.2 million. I'm getting to about 5. And I've also started doing another business that's called Vitalia, which is a biotech acceleration zone where we aim to supercharge hundreds of companies that can bring drugs to market in 4 months instead of 10 years. And starting with a pop up city in Prospera and then build longevity districts in 3 to 5 other jurisdictions around the world.
So, Nicholas, there was a reason that we connected early on, and I think it's because we have very similar backgrounds with this. I was in the DC think tank world for a little bit too. I worked at Cato right out of school. Then I was in the world of ideas too. I was working on my PhD in philosophy and expected to live in the ivory tower, but like you, started to realize that that has a limited impact in the world. Actually, you have to translate ideas into action. And also, I actually have a quote from Steve Jobs up on my wall here at my place that the only way to do great work is to love what you do. And I can tell you love doing this, that you have figured out what you're passionate about. But I want to really understand, I want to start by asking about Infinita Fund and why you switched from being an entrepreneur, starting your own companies, to launching this fund to invest in others. Why did you make that switch and what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so the original origin story is I came to Prospera and I started the first Build Prospera Summit. So I just spontaneously asked a bunch of other entrepreneurs, hey, let's check this out together. This way, we also give Prospera a good incentive to bring all their leadership team and all their people to welcome us and tell us everything that's going on. And I planned this kind of as an unconference. So on the last day, I did a pitch competition, right? So this is less organization for me, and it also turned out to be one of the greatest ideas ever. I do that now for all sorts of conferences too. And I also pitched myself, and I invited a friend. She was there with us, and she used to work for Sequoia Capital. I had no idea how to even start thinking about doing a VC fund, but she had. So she had kind of a napkin strategy how that could look like. And then we pitched it, and then we won the pitch competition. And Eric Brimman, the CEO, told us, "Hey, what help do you need to get started? So let's do it." And in the end, I did it myself without her, but I ended up doing it. And what excites me about it is, I think with the VC fund, I think I'm uniquely positioned, and something that I'm very strong at is building networks, right? So, and this enables me to build both a network with great founders, which I think is the biggest bottleneck, and also the ones who have the most upside from using Prospera and any other future in startup societies, and also with investors, right? Because we need a lot of investment. We need to bring this to the attention of people, like us and in our communities who want to really realize the kinds of ideas we have for the kinds of change we want to see. So that was tremendously valuable for me in sort of building a network for this kind of endeavor. At heart, I'm an entrepreneur though. So I really enjoy sort of creating the content, creating the awareness, building all these networks and all these entrepreneurs. But I want to build lasting structures and organizations, right? So I see investing definitely as a very good catalyst for the kind of work I want to do. But that's also why I started now with Vitalia and getting back to be an operator, build teams, and like execute on a very large mission. So I see these two as complementary. So I'll continue investing in the future for sure, but I also want to build companies for the rest of my life. So
And the exciting thing about being on the investment side is that you can still build these other companies. It's not just investing in them. It's especially early on, being an active investor is still helping build those companies that we're investing in, giving whatever advice and support that we can. And you have the opportunity to create your own companies still, like Vitalia. It's very fluid, actually. One of the things that I'm realizing as we've launched Liberty Ventures and are doing this just earlier this year.
yeah, exactly. And especially the setup is taking a lot of time. But once you have the setup for your fund, That's pretty much something you don't have to spend your full time on. And also, I think operating and doing startup gives you just a sharper mind and a sharper edge. It also exposes you to a vertical where you then find better founders, right? So you just can give better advice to founders. You have a better reputation. Also, specifically with the business that I'm doing with Italia, it's going to be the model is almost like an accelerator, right? So I'm still going to find and aiming to attract ambitious founders to come to this. So it's very complementary with doing the fund.
100%. Now, let me ask you, beyond just being interested in these regulated industries and wanting to support deregulation for innovation, maybe I'll put the question this way. Why are you limiting yourself just to some of the most challenging industries to build innovative businesses in instead of looking at every opportunity potentially out there in order to get the best ROI? This is one of the questions that I often get about the Liberty Ventures thesis as well. And I'm curious how you look at that and what you explain to people as to why you think this is a good venture model.
Well, I think Liberty offers by far the best ROI possible, right? So it's that's the air to breathe for entrepreneurs, right? So without the kind of liberties and you can clearly see the difference when you're in the United States versus like Honduras. Right? Honduras getting good financing options and sort of having legal stability and secure property rights. Like there's a lot of criticized about the United States, but it's certainly better than in Honduras or many parts of Africa. So that
Mm-hmm.
freedom and that security of property rights and all these things are the air to breathe for entrepreneurs. Without it, it can't happen, right? So by expanding that space for entrepreneurs and giving them these additional options, and I just believe I found something with Prospera, and this is a trend that's now getting really big with Vitalik Buterin, with Balaji Srinivasan, having many other projects that are coming to the starting line, where there's just tremendous alpha in that. I think we just haven't thought about many of these industries for a long time. And many smart people have banged their heads against the walls and have been still able to make progress in biotech and healthcare. But just imagine how different things would look like if we just do a couple of things differently when it comes to the FDA or how we do medical regulations, or the same thing in crypto. Like these bottlenecks are so massive. So this the ability to remove some of these bottlenecks with some very novel options, and there's already real traction with startups, right? So there's Minicircle, for example, with developed a gene therapy here on the island, right, under the same safety standards and protocols as the FDA, just cutting on the bureaucracy and reducing their costs by like 95%. And they can also do medical tourism here, right? So they brought one of their first patients was the longevity super influencer Brian Johnson. So this just shows you how much of an alpha there is if you find ways to increase liberty for entrepreneurs and give them these kinds of options in better institutions here in Honduras, but also anywhere in the world, right? So there is projects in Africa going on. Talent City, for example, we're just saying what are the biggest bottlenecks for entrepreneurs? Well, incorporating a company, the bureaucracy, the electricity, the infrastructure, and all that. So by enabling that kind of infrastructure and the tools of entrepreneurs, and first and foremost, that's liberty. And inspired by the ideas of liberty, I think there's just tremendous and underexplored alpha. And I think we have a real and huge chance of succeeding in this. And we haven't seen nothing yet in many of those industries. And I think we'll be really seeing something that's unprecedented.
So I think that's a great explanation. Let me make sure I understand what you're trying to do with this. In supporting the innovation in these companies in these startup cities, that is the idea that this shows the ability to innovate, to still meet the same safety standards, to do great things without regulation that you hope will then be a model for other countries that have overregulation in those industries in order to help bring about more liberty in those areas and the innovations that come with the company.
Sure, but that's a bit more the change that I won't necessarily capture as a fund, right? So I want other jurisdiction to be inspired by this, right? Because I also think I put a lot of intellectual capital in this, so I'm well positioned to see when that's happening and where the additional alpha opportunities are that are on top of that, right? But for now, sort of the main advantage or alpha with my fund is, other investors don't even look at that, right? So some of the companies that I'm looking at, they're not even telling the whole story to their investors, right? Because they don't want to raise additional questions. It's just a lot of context required to understand, hey, getting a banking license here is super easy. So I can just go to market much faster, or setting up an insurance, Or the thing with like the clinical trials, right, and the biotechnology and the medical tourism, right? To others, that just raises question is a reason to say no, and for me, that's a reason to say yes. And I think there's this tremendous alpha in that that's only expanding. And as the fund that is very well known for that, so I'm certainly the first fund having sort of that downstream of new network states and startup cities thesis. I think I'm very well positioned to capture much of the opportunity that that space is generating.
That makes perfect sense that you're taking advantage of the alpha available with these startup cities and the opportunities to innovate there that aren't available elsewhere. And that's the thesis that you're presenting to investors and what you're really looking at.
Yeah, and also at the same time, keeping I'm deliberately a small investor. So for the perspective of founders, I'm an optionality that's sitting at their cap table, right? So not all of these founders are necessarily needing to relocate to places like Prosper. It's just optionality. So it's just capturing on the upside, and at the same time, my focus and my deal flow is still wide enough, right? So I'm looking at these big industries, and my thesis is, the founders, and I've been have strong market feedback on that. Founders get that, right? So when you're in the system and when you're struggling with the FDA or FAA approvals, the challenge is so inside out. So I think the best founders in these industries, they are very attracted to these options, right? So I can still just pick the best founders in these industries and don't have to fight for allocation because I do 50 to 100K tickets. And the founders feel just very reassured that there's someone at their cap table thinking really hard about these regulatory issues and like has access to many of the world's experts, like through my podcast and through my network, to just help them sort of find hacks to the regulatory system, right?
I love that. And so it's really obvious on the founder side the attraction of Infinita Ventures or why they'd be attracted to it. Let's talk about the process of raising a fund. This is something that I think a lot of people have questions about, and it is a process. It takes a long time and a lot of work, and you're still in the midst of it right now. And actually, the way that these go is that you just are constantly raising so long as you're planning on continuing to keep investing going forward. So, what's that been like for you so far, and what have you learned in this process?
Yeah, so it's kind of a crazy story, right? Because I started this fund having no experience in investment or track record whatsoever. Right now, among my 20 something LPs, one of them I knew before all this, which is highly unusual. Typically, your LPs are people you've known and who've trusted you for a while before. But I think I was able to utilize a couple of my strengths. One is that I'm a former operator, so I just know how to operate very efficiently. And I also have sales experience, right? So building a pipeline and a CRM and just constantly prospecting each day. That's just something I'm very used to that many emerging fund managers are not used to doing, right? So it's just sales like in any other company that I just have a lot of experience in. And then I think I was successfully utilizing content to build my credibility, right? So the podcast, like the one you're doing, was a tremendously valuable asset for me because not only did it's just a small ask from some of these people with bigger names and with a lot of expertise, because you give them an audience, right? And it's fun to talk on a podcast because you're the one who's in focus. You get asked all the questions, the podcast host is preparing. That's just really fun. And it also feels great and flattering to be, seen as the expert and be in the limelight. So this way you can quickly get people on your podcast with a lot of credibility. And that compounds, right? So you automatically become associated with your names. That attracts other good names to come on. And it becomes like a business card. So you're showing others the kinds of interesting people you're involved with. And that makes you automatically attractive. Um, yeah, and then finally, I think the story with Prospera is just novel and fascinating, right? So I don't have to like if someone is in the liberty space that has huge appeal or attraction. So my job is usually to show, hey, there's some real things happening, and I've done my homework. Like I had a really good fund and corporation program that just taught me a lot of the skills and that gave me like very good admin, very good legal, very good software. So once and they just want to just not miss out on that, right? So many people who just attracted to that and whom I could credibly convey, hey, I know what I'm talking about and I'm vetted by the community. That's just enough to do at least a small check and see where this is going. And I just built my credibility over time, invited people to events, created more content, And this way they invested more, referred me to more. So just like a startup, I think I got a good amount of momentum and traction going. And I think it was overall easier for me than for many other funds during the bear market, right? Because I was able to raise much more on a story than on like financials and track records or anything like that, which is where it would have been hard for me to compete on, with given my background.
So I think you're right. The story is incredibly important. It's the same thing for when companies are pitching to investors. You need to have a compelling story, not just strong financials, but typically you do need the financials behind it as well. I'm really curious how you have been tackling the fact that you don't have this track record. You've got this thesis and this story and these connections that you're leveraging.
Yeah, again, I mean, what does good investment come down to? I mean, one, having good access, right? So I was, scoring credibility points again through the podcast. There were really exciting founders that were on. I just put a lot of content and on social media out. So just I was seen with some of these founders, so I could show I have access. And also I was an operator before, right? So I did a lot of outreach to founders, and I surrounded myself with really good founders. So I think that's extremely, extremely underutilized from the perspective of an investment fund manager. Surround yourself with great founders. So understand their problems, see that you can help them, be just very out there, be very helpful, get a good reputation with founders. I got some of my best LP intros and intros to other investments from amazing founders. And I think as a previous, early employee, founder, entrepreneur, I think I built a good credibility and motion there, and that's something to utilize then for access. And I was able to successfully convey that then also to other entrepreneurs. And then, people needed to trust me a bit on good judgment, of course, right? So that's why I was raising a small fund, right? So that was also a very good strategic choice, right? So this way I'm building a track record over time. So I've made the first 15 investments. I was able to talk with them about it. And now I'm, having much more to show for as an investment manager.
I love that. And again, it's not dissimilar from what we're doing with Liberty Ventures. We haven't raised a fund yet. We're starting as an angel network so that we're able to include our investors in the diligence process and deciding which opportunities they want to back, but with a very similar approach to what you're talking about. So I love that. And you're absolutely right. Good judgment is critical with this. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. So I want to dig into that. How how do you when you're looking at your opportunities, there are always so many more than you're able to invest in, and you've got great deal flow. How are you, let's just start at the very beginning. When you initially look at an opportunity that comes across your inbox, how do you decide if you want to really dig into it in the first place or not?
Yeah, yeah. So let me preface that by giving a more of the bigger level idea of how I'm approaching things, right? And to be fair and honest, right? So I've made my first investment about a year ago, right? So I don't have the data to like back it up that that really works. But I read a lot, I listen a lot. I was very inspired by many of the talks that someone like a Peter Thiel, a Mark Andreessen, Keith Robois, or Michael Gibson from 1517 Fund do. As of I hired several dozens of people before, so I try to focus in a lot on like the strength of a particular person. I've been an operator before, so I know what it takes to operate, the drive and energy. So that's really made me focused or having like a very strong talent thesis, right? So I think I have very good judgment when it comes to talent, to energy level, to drive, to all these things. Much more so, and I value that much more so over fundamentals. And I was really surprised when I did the VC Lab program, basically an accelerator that hundreds of funds went through, that that's not at all common, right? I was like, hey, all these great investors with this crazy track record, like Peter Thiel, are putting everything out there, right? And I'm like meticulously taking notes and doing it like that. And then you go into the pool with everyone else, and no one else does that, right? Everyone else has like a checklist investor approach, right? So, what about this fundamentals? Do they have the documents on this and that? It just gives you kind of comfort, right? Do I understand what they're doing? Whatever, whatever. I think you being able to understand what specifically they're doing in a specific market can be helpful, especially if you combine it with other strengths, right? So, but I think it's relatively overvalued over having a very strong talent thesis, right? I mean, look at Michael Gibson, for example. He did the Thiel Fellowship, right? And that generated 100 billion in equity value over 10 years, just from, I think, 200 people that they just, very carefully selected and handpicked on. And he writes about that in a book, and I had him on my podcast. So that sharpens my thinking and my thesis as well. So I also look, what are they seeing, and then I do pattern recognition with other founders. And I very strongly believe that is the recipe for the future. I don't yet have the data to back it up, but again, it's surprising to me how little that's valued in the investment world overall, and how little others are utilizing it. And it just makes me sort of, all right, so this is maybe something that Thiel and Gibson and others have found, that is, there's a very strong alpha in that on its own. And I just see also from whom they're picking and from whom I'm meeting through all these networks, because I'm close to them and to some other funds and like ours. So we see some of the same people, right? So we've also made one co-investment, right? I also met him to 1517 fund. So we're having a certain view that I think has been proven very successful in the future, that I've learned a lot from.
So I love that advice. That go and listen to what other really successful investors say that they're doing, because they are giving that advice out there. And want to be able to share that with some other people here, or even some entrepreneurs who may be listening that are thinking about applying to your fund. What is the first thing that you're looking for? What's one of the characteristics in that pattern recognition that you're paying attention to?
Yeah, so can definitely get much more specific, and there's multiple different dimensions, right? So, but of course, the main thing is, are they capable, right? Are they capable to? Do they have a very big, outlandishly ambitious ideas, and are they capable people, right? If you can successfully convey these two things, that are already biasing me a lot, right? Again, most founders don't do that. They don't sort of think big enough, right? So even that's something that's still underrated and undervalued. It takes training, because you need others to encourage you, and you need to have gained a lot of something that Michael Gibson calls hyperfluency, right? So that's definitely one thing to make look closely for. I don't necessarily need to understand what they're doing, because if I understand it, then it's nothing new, right? And if it's nothing new, then it's nothing big and very disruptive. But I want to look for, how fluent are they, right? Do they use first principle thinking? Do they have like an insane command of like all the available industry data that's out there? And something that's very important for me is, do they have customer hyperfluency, right? So I look very closely, do they understand the problem of their customer? Have they talked to hundreds, ideally, right? And to have they talk to them in a very structured way, like, how are you doing it right now? What are other solutions that you're using? Why are you using this over others? So you have a very sharp mind when it comes to the customer, right? So I value that extremely highly. And then there's tons of other things. You need to have a high enough level of emotional maturity. You need to um, have a high enough level of edge control, right? So can you, when shit hits the fan, are you someone who you trust can be a leader in that situation? So there's all these like very um, talent or character or personality driven things that, to be fair, as an investor, I have very limited information on, right? So I try to collect that from other references. I try to look the founder up in podcast interviews they gave and content they created. It's a very strong signal for me, right? You're putting yourself out there, and that's just a very good strategy to be seen by other investors and prospective employees. It also speaks to your hyperfluency, that you can get coherent material about yourself out there. So I try to get that kind of perspective on a founder. And then the business they're doing themselves, I have a couple of people, venture partners, that I just talk to, right? I'm not saying I don't care about the technical, whatever, due diligence part, right? Because it's, for some things, I'm obviously a bit more generalist, right? Because I have these three different areas. Biotech and healthcare, for example, I don't have like a deep expertise in, maybe in healthcare incentives and models or whatever, but not necessarily in like bioscience, right? So I have a very good venture partner here who's like an extremely rigorous Oxford PhD type, who has started multiple businesses. So you just seen loads of it, so you can compare. Same, we have a common friend, Eli Dorado, who's just a terrific. He's just terrific when it comes to technical due diligence, when it comes to things like air mobility, when it comes to things like energy. So I just put my feelers out there. Hey, um, have you seen many of these? How does it compare to some others that you've seen? Do they have a level of understanding that makes them just exceptional in the specific area that they're in? So that's roughly how I go about an investment.
Amazing. I think there's so many great insights from that. And to put a finer point on it, especially for entrepreneurs listening to this, because you've been an operator, now you're on the investment side. Is there anything that you think a lot of founders or entrepreneurs sort of misunderstand or get wrong about the VC world or seeking investments that if you could give them one piece of advice on how to do better, you would?
Yeah, my one piece of advice to founders. So just overvalue the importance of VC, right? So I like the advice that Paul Graham gives, right, and many others. Raise money when you can, not when you need it, right? You're not in the right position when you need it, right? So when you need it is where you need to get creative on the business side and creating value to customers, right? So VCs are not going to save your business that has so far failed to attract customers or traction. You need to get creative in building real momentum. And then VC is just there to, put fuel on the fire. But they're not there to start the fire. You need to start that yourself. I think that's the most important lesson by far for any founder, right? So don't think you need to raise money to do your business. You can get creative and get that initial traction and momentum without money. And if you can't, then I mean, there are some exceptions, like but even the exceptions, sometimes you can get very creative about in some kind of hardware or biotech or whatever area. Even there, you can get very creative. Again, speaks to some of the founders that I'm trying to attract, getting creative and going to a place like Prospera to do clinical trials much cheaper. Yeah, that's the ultimate level of creativity. There are all these ways. So try to see VC or go to VCs when you come from a position of strength. Because once you're in a position of strength, you're irresistible. Like I've raised money for this business that I'm starting out with Vitalia, right? And it's different than raising money from LPs, right? So you can't build momentum in the same way that easily as you can with a company. But with this company, we just had a tremendous amount of momentum and novelty. And both my co-founder Lawrence Ian and I have experience as fundraisers and have a network. So we just told this story, right? And we had momentum, we had proof points, and we were like, this is happening now, giving everyone deadlines. And I was surprised myself. We were oversubscribed on a 1 million round in less than a week, right? So, yeah, I mean, I couldn't believe it myself, right? But it just speaks to come from a position of strength, come from a position of momentum, and build up towards it and then strategically utilize that momentum, right? Think about your next milestone, your seed round. What do I need to prove to have really good momentum in that round? The best founders and fundraisers anticipate that, right? So what do I need to build to go into that next round with showing this amazing progress that you've made? And once you're mastering that process, fundraising is really fun and easy actually. And it takes a while to get there and to learn that. But as a founder, as an entrepreneur, that's sort of one of the highest leverage points you can have. So don't be afraid to get started at it. Right. So it's a lot to learn about. But again, the first piece of advice, rise from a position of strength.
I think that is an invaluable piece of advice for them. And I've been learning so much from this podcast as well. Thank you, Nicholas. I really appreciate it. My last question that I like to ask everyone, it starts from the context of I think building connections and relationships is absolutely critical. And the advice I give to everyone, if they want to initiate a new relationship, they want to learn something new, is to just reach out to a person that you want to connect with or you want to learn from, and offer to help them do something that they want to accomplish already. And so I want to ask you, if anyone listening to this wants to connect with you, wants to learn from you, what is the one thing that they could reach out and say they want to help you do X that you would positively respond to and be excited to get a message about?
Yeah, there's so many ways to do this, and this is an enormously valuable piece of advice that you're giving here, right? So any grad student or anyone who doesn't yet have a track record or whatever, just reach out. And there's many ways, like, um, for example, if you see if you're interested in venture and you want to break in, just look at the companies I invested in and send me a couple of similar companies that you've done research on. I mean, any simple like that, right? So any VC in a similar position, they would be like, cool, someone's putting in real effort and is really excited about what I'm doing. So if engage with the content, develop a real passion for it, and you know, you can get a job with any VC fund if you just like go very specifically into what they're into and develop sort of content recommendations for companies, insights around the space. I mean, there's a bit of a you need to communicate it in a way that you're not being perceived as pushy or whatever. You can do that by going to the events of someone, to recommend other people to go to my events. Huge value, right? I'm constantly trying to recruit people to come to my events, find my podcast, my content. Do that. Find other people to come that could get value out of it. Um, I organized this 2 month long pop up city, Vitalia. I'm looking for biotech entrepreneurs, mostly longevity scientists, also crypto. So, recruit great people to come to it. There's just so much that I need all the time. So, I think breaking into VC is really also invite me to your podcast. Right? I really enjoy this. This is really fun. I really like that there's more of me out there. And sort of by building an audience of people that see me, you have a lot to gain because again, you get that visibility sort of through for my network because people in my network look, where am I speaking? So they find your podcast. And then, show that to other people in your network that are onto doing great things that find my work through that. So I think podcasting specifically is a great idea for anyone to get started. It will be much easier for you to learn quickly by talking to people with a lot of experience by adding value to them in this way. So, and maybe one last anecdote. So, yeah, maybe one last anecdote on that. So, I had a really cool guest on my show. You should also have him on. Brad Kugelmass. He's the founder of a company called Last Energy that is disrupting the nuclear power industry. And he also had no technical background in nuclear. So, what did he do? He started a podcast. So, he did a podcast for 3 years called Titans of Nuclear, where he talked to the 300, 350 biggest nuclear experts in the world. After those 3 years, he was the biggest expert in the world. And he's since, building a great company that's raised hundreds of millions. So even if you're not yet in the field, doing a podcast, there is ways to break into that.
That is absolutely brilliant. And I will say to anyone listening that it's been a lot of fun having Niklas on the podcast. I encourage you all to invite him as well. And want to give you a chance to plug where they can go to find your podcast and your events coming up, Niklas, so that they can get involved.
Sure. So just Google stranded technologies, right? It's like stranded assets, stranded technologies. You can also find it on my website, infinitavc.com. There you find links to my blog and to the podcast and to my events as well. Or you can directly search for vitalia.city. All right. So Vitalia is like Italia, just with Vita and then .city. So really looking forward to connecting with many of you.
Fantastic. Niklas, thank you so much, not only for joining the podcast and sharing these amazing insights, but for everything that you're doing with Infinita, with all of your businesses, and just making the world freer and more prosperous.
Thanks. And thanks for all the great work that you do and building this very, very aligned network. So I hope many of your listeners and I and you will do great things together and push the boundaries for liberty in our lifetime.
Here, here. Let's go do it.